Hey guys, this is Crazy Kylo. Today I want to give my 8 best tips for getting to rank 1 as Survivor in DBD in 2021. Getting to rank 1 as Survivor is no easy job for your first time, and it's a rewarding accomplishment to be able to say that you've hit the top. With this goal in mind, let's get right into it. So the first tip that I have is understanding the basics. I'm sure almost everyone playing this game has the general idea of how the game works as a survivor, but I wanted to cover the emblem system as this shows you how you performed in a match and determines if you pip or depip. You will want to aim for at least a single pip each game as this works out to a well-balanced performance in your match. The emblem system works with pips where it requires 3 pips to rank up until rank 18, and it requires 4 pips to rank up until you hit rank 12, and finally requires 5 pips to rank up all the way until you hit rank 1. So every game you finish, you'll be taken to the end of the match results, which breaks down into 4 categories. There's objective, survival, altruism, and boldness. The objective category rewards points for doing generators and doing totems. The survival category rewards points based on escaping, and some points can also be gained by self-healing and struggling on a hook. The altruism category rewards points for unhooking survivors and healing them. And the boldness category rewards points for being in chases with the killer or being in the terror radius of the killer. To hit rank 1 as Survivor, it's best to aim for doing a little bit of everything in each category, as this gives you the most points and will help you pip. For example, in a typical game, you should try to aim to do 1 to 2 generators, get 2 unhooks, get chased by the killer for at least a minute. This could likely be longer depending on the length of the game, cleanse a totem, and then escape if possible. A lot of getting to rank 1 is being a well-rounded survivor and trying to do pretty much everything possible in a match. Just keep in mind that you don't need to escape. You just need to do enough so you can pip. The second tip is map knowledge. So what I mean by this is knowing as soon as you spawn which map you are on and the general layout of the map. Every time you load in, the map will be in the bottom left, and this will help you know immediately what you'll be dealing with. This is important because each map varies in size, and some maps are smaller, which are usually more killer favored as the gens are closer together and there can be less pallets to work with, and other maps are bigger, which can be more survivor favored as things are spread out and makes the killer have to travel further between gens. There's around 35 total maps between all the variations, and it can take some time to get familiar or even comfortable being on a map, but it just takes time playing on a map multiple times to eventually learn the layout. You can also play Kill Your Friends if you want to explore a map to practice just to familiarize yourself. You want to get to the point where you know where the main buildings are as well as where the basement can spawn, as each map has 2 different spawn locations, typically. It's just helpful to know this because all of these main buildings won't change locations in the same map, so it helps you plan ahead so you'll likely know where to look for gens, where to find totems, as well as where pallets will likely be. There's 3 maps that I'd say that can be a little bit more difficult for survivors, which are Larry's Memorial, The Game, and Hawkins Lab, because all of these maps are indoor maps and it can be harder to find gens and pallets because you need to recognize where you are based on the other rooms that are near you. The good thing though is there's only 1 variation for each one of these, so once you know the layout, it will help increase your success at pipping on these more difficult maps. One thing I do want to point out is that each map will load with a set number of tiles. I'll cover this a little bit more in detail when I get to looping, but basically tiles are different loops that load in at random when you play a map. So that's the biggest thing, is if you play the same map in the same variation 3 times in a row, you'll likely get different tiles, and the loops that spawn in the different locations can make for 3 different entire experiences, even though you'd be playing on the same map 3 times. So the third tip is killers. The best thing that can help you with getting to rank 1 as Survivor is understanding the killers and all their different abilities. The best way to learn this is playing killer, and just understanding it yourself as you'll learn their strengths and weaknesses of each killer. I know that killer can be stressful and sometimes unfun depending on the matchmaking, but even if you have a really challenging game where you don't get any kills, you can always take away what those survivors were doing and apply it to how you play Survivor against that killer for your next game. Also, another big reason to understand killers is because certain killers require looping differently. For example, if you're going against a Huntress, a Deathslinger, Pyramid Head, or the Trickster, they all have range attacks which can prevent you from looping normally like some of the other killers. With these, you usually want to have objects or walls in between you and the killer, as this removes line of sight and can take away that killer's ability to hit you with their range. Another set of killers to watch is Trapper and Hag, as they both work somewhat similar by placing traps around either loops or in or near the basement. The best way to deal with the hag traps are a flashlight, because if you shine it on a trap, it will disappear. The trapper ones can be a little bit more difficult, as you need to look for a prompt to disarm the trap, but there's also an add-on that disabling a trap can injure you, or the traps can reset themselves after 30 seconds. So if you notice this happening, make sure you disarm when injured and the trapper isn't near you. The last example I'll give for killers is Bubba and Billy, as these killers have one-shot down attacks where they're trying to use their ability as frequently as they can. So knowing this, if you're healthy, the best thing you can do is run at loops that have windows, as vaulting one can immediately put distance between you and the killer and negate their use of their ability. Your main goal is, if you have to take a hit from one of these two killers, that you force them into a situation where they have to use their basic attack, which is usually vaulting a window, and then this will help prolong the chase as you aren't getting one shot down instantly. The fourth tip is perks. So what I recommend if you want to get to rank 1 is you should try running an exhaustion perk, a team perk, and then the last two perks are kind of your choice based on how you want to play. So the best exhaustion perk, in my opinion, is Dead Hard, as this perk allows you when injured to press the action button, and it gives you invincibility for a brief moment and moves you slightly forward in the direction that you're facing. It's really useful to help greed loops by allowing you to do an extra lap to waste that much more time. You could also use Lithe or Balanced Landing, as Lithe can be really useful to get a quick vault and get a lot of distance on a killer, and Balance is good with maps that have 2-story buildings or anything that allows you to fall from like a 5-foot height or so. There's hills that can spawn on each map, and that's really what you're going to look for on maps that don't have 2-story buildings, as that's the only thing besides tractors that can trigger Balanced. For the team perk, I'd recommend Borrowed Time, as this allows you to pull a survivor off hook and can somewhat prevent a killer from tunneling that survivor, but also you do need to get safe unhooks for your altruism points, and giving a survivor that extra hit can help guarantee your points instead of them going down instantly and you losing those points. You could also run Will Make It, which gives you a speed boost to your healing after unhooking, which is useful as long as the killer doesn't come back to the area or is in the area. For the last two perks, there's a lot of choices based on how you want to play. I like running Decisive, as this is the best anti-tunnel perk as long as you hit the skill check. This perk gives you 1 minute after being unhooked, where if the killer downs you and picks you up, you get an opportunity to jump off. A little trick that can help avoid killers leaving you on the ground is forcing Decisive. So if the killer's coming after you just got off of a hook, hop in a locker, and if they choose to grab you, you get your skill check. Otherwise, if they stay there, they waste about a minute of their time while your teammates are hopefully doing the objective. Some other perks that are good to run are Spine Chill, Unbreakable, Deliverance, For the People, Dance With Me, Quick and Quiet, Inner Strength, and Kindred. All of these are very situational perks, but you will see them come up and be useful. Kindred, I feel like, is best to run if you plan to solo queue, as this perk will show everyone else when you get hooked where the killer is if he's near you, and allows your teammates to see each other and allows them to work together without actually needing to be able to talk to each other. Another perk you could run is Empathy, as this allows you to track injured teammates and can be useful to see where the killer is based on the injured teammates' movements. The fifth tip is teamwork, which is a big part of this game along with doing your part. I'd recommend to play with a group of friends, as everyone being on comms is very useful for being as efficient as possible, but is also good information for knowing who's getting chased and where the killer is. So if you are playing with friends, it is best to try to take turns who gets unhooked and who does the gens, because you all need to get points in each category. It's also worth mentioning that saving a survivor from getting picked up will be easier to coordinate if you can talk with each other, as someone can be ready with a flashlight or waiting close to a pallet to throw down on the killer. You also want to try to spread the hooks throughout the team to make sure no one dies early, as you'll have an easier time of escaping if everyone is alive at the end game. And once you get to the end game, that's where Borrowed Time will become more useful, as you can take hits and body block for your teammates, which can buy you time so you can all make that dash to the exit, as well as get you some extra altruism points. If you are solo queuing, you can still get to ranked 1, but it'll be more challenging, as you need to be more aware of what your teammates are doing and doing your best to do gens if not being chased, or unhooking a survivor when the opportunity presents itself. And this leads me to my next tip, awareness. So the best thing you can do, which will help you get to rank 1, is awareness. So this is what I was talking about as solo queuing, but you should do this every game regardless if you're playing with friends or not. So awareness, there's a lot of things you need to be paying attention to. So the first thing, as soon as you load into a game, you'll likely not have a clue who the killer is. It's usually best to assume that it's a stealth killer, as this won't catch you off guard if the killer does come to you first. If the killer does come to you first, you'll need to know what's around you. So usually when I start a game, I see where the closest gen is along with what loops are near me, so I know what I have to work with if the killer does come to me first. If not, make sure you're doing the objective and trying to get the gens done, but make sure you spread the gens so you aren't doing them all on one side of the map and 3-genning your team in the late game. The hardest thing to come back for survivors is a 3-gen situation, so being aware of what gens get done and where they are done as the game progresses, this will help eliminate you running into that tough situation. Also, make sure when you're at the gens that you're looking around for the killer, as the last thing that you want is to get gen grabbed or get one shot by an ability because you were looking the wrong way. Also, if you can, try to keep track of the loops that get used if you are running the killer or if you aren't running the killer. So if you see a teammate use a pallet, know later on in the game that you shouldn't run to that loop, as that'll just be a free hit for the killer. If a lot of pallets get used in an area with a gen you're trying to finish, you either need to try to finish that gen as fast as possible or just leave it so you don't get caught in a dead zone if the killer decides to come there. And then this also works with totems and killer perks. So something you should always remember are totems. Generally, it's best to get all 5 done before you finish the last gen, as this removes the threat of no-ed. But you do need to keep in mind that it can be time consuming to search for totems if you aren't running small game. It's also best to get totems because a lot of killers at red ranks are running Ruin and Undying. So I believe they changed Undying so it can only bounce around once, but it does protect the first hex that gets cleansed and keeps it in play by moving it to a dull totem. So let's say the first totem you cleanse is Ruin, Undying will take its place and you'll have to go find and cleanse another hex to remove Ruin. It is best to try to cleanse Ruin once you know about it. Usually when you spawn in, get on a gen and then get off for a second and see if it sparks. If it does, it's best to find the totem, as Ruin can really take progress off a gen and really start hurting later into the game. You should also be cautious because some killers run Haunted Ground, which is a hex that takes up 2 totem spots on a map, and when it's cleansed, it exposes all survivors for a minute. Another one you need to be aware of is Devour Hope, as this hex will give a killer a token for each time a survivor gets unhooked 24 meters away from the killer. So once they have 3 tokens, they can one-shot down on a basic, and when they get to 5, they can Mori. So you do want to be on the lookout for hexes, as they can very quickly change a game. The last tip I have for reaching rank 1, and is honestly one of the most important tips, is looping a killer. This is so useful, as looping a killer wastes the killer's time, and it can help buy your team a lot of time to get the gens done or get the momentum of the game back on the survivor's side. It is important to know that a killer can have a lot of momentum by getting fast downs and hooks, but it only takes one chase to completely flip the game around back towards the survivors. I'm gonna have to try to break this down into a few tips for looping, as there's so much that you need to keep in mind anytime that you are looping a killer. So some tips to keep in mind while looping are running as tight as you can without getting caught on anything, as this makes for the most optimal looping and can allow you to get an extra loop in before you have to throw a pallet. You should also look behind you somewhat frequently while looping, as this allows you to see what the killer is doing and can allow you to adjust to the killer so you can waste the maximum amount of time before needing to throw a pallet or potentially dodging a projectile that the killer could throw at you. Once you've thrown the pallet, you want the killer to break the pallet before you run away, as this will end a killer's bloodlust and allow you to reset. If a killer doesn't break the pallet, you will have to continue looping and try to force them to, or until you get hit. If you do get hit, immediately run towards another loop. Don't stay at the pallet, as this forces the killer to waste time chasing after you again, and then they'll have to spend more additional time trying to get to you at that new loop. Always keep in mind where the next loop is that you want to go to, so once a killer breaks the pallet, you have a route planned and can take an optimal path to the next loop. This is useful so you aren't just getting to a new loop and having to immediately throw the pallet. If running against a ranged killer, as mentioned earlier, you have to loop differently. Windows are not as safe since you are locked in a fixed position. You should also keep this in mind with throwing down pallets too, which usually the best thing to do is to mind game the pallet by running extra laps as most killers will try to use their ability the first time they chase you, and once they do, you'll be able to get extra distance and you'll be able to get extra laps in that loop. And finally, look to combo loops together. Sometimes some loops are close enough together that you're able to create a bigger loop and waste more time just by comboing the two loops. It really depends on the map, but sometimes there will be a TL wall right next to Killer Shack, which can really waste time, as you always have the additional option of looping by leaving mid-loop to go to a new one. So I wanted to talk about this some, but there are a lot of different loops. The most common ones you're going to encounter are Killer Shack, Jungle Gyms, which do have two variants, TLs, 4 lanes or H lanes, depends on which you prefer. And then there's a loop that I call the eye loop because it's in the shape of an eye. And there's two variants where one is, I say, open because you can see across it, and the other is closed because the walls are high up and you can't see across it at all. You won't be able to see where the killer is. And the last ones are kind of just common pallets, which are really small loops that are usually just intended to stun the killer and then just keep running. I do plan to make a video in the future that shows all these different loops and how to loop at them, but I thought it was best to just make this its own video, as there are a ton of loops to cover and there's just so much more detail I want to go into with looping. And these are my 8 tips for becoming a rank 1 survivor in DBD. If you found this video helpful, leave a like, as that helped me out a lot, and let me know in the comments what your best tip is for anyone who's trying to grind to rank 1. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like, and if you want to see more Dead by Daylight videos, hit that subscribe button. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next video.